I'd like to start by reading from an email that I received recently from one of the nation's best healthcare reporters, John McKenzie, formerly of ABC News. As I read this, keep in mind that you could not find a more sophisticated consumer of healthcare services than Mr. McKenzie. Here is what he wrote to me. Quote, I went for an annual checkup to a new internist who was also board certified as a cardiologist. He suggested that in addition to learning my cholesterol levels, I should get my cardiac calcium score. He wrote a prescription and sent me off to a popular imaging center on Manhattan's Upper East Side. After filling out the necessary paperwork and a 10-minute wait, I was led into a large room with an imaging table. Everything was fine until I saw the word radiation on one of the signs attached to the wall. I don't know why I hadn't thought about it, but suddenly I recalled your series and the risks involved. The technician told me to lie down on the table. I did, but not before asking, do these machines give off much radiation? No, she reassured. They're very safe. Still uneasy, I asked, do you have other CT machines that give off less radiation? Without hesitating, she looked at me and answered, you want less radiation? I repressed my urge to scream. Yes, I answered softly. The dialogue, as I recall, continued like this. Sure, we can do this on a different machine if you want. And there will be less radiation? Yes. And you will still be able to capture the images you need? Yes. She then led me out of one room into another down the hall. I had a similar table and scanning machine. I am trying my very best to be calm and polite. I want to ask the obvious question, why didn't you offer this to me in the first place? But I am convinced that is only going to drag out my time here. I just want out quickly. The next day I called the cardiologist and told him what happened. He said he was disturbed by this story and would call the imaging center to follow up. But did you specify the radiation level the clinic was to use, I asked? Was it on the script? No, he said. They've assured me that they were using only the lowest radiation levels possible. It should be obvious as to why I use this example to begin my talk on what the public wants and needs to know about medical radiation. Consumers are largely ignorant about radiation dosages, how they vary, and what risks they pose. Why? Because doctors aren't doing a good job of explaining it. Either because they aren't as knowledgeable as they should be, they don't want to frighten patients, or the worst reason of all, they believe they alone know best. When I started out covering healthcare issues 30 years ago, the subject of quality rarely surfaced. I can give you many examples, but here's one. Back when I worked as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, my editor, who was a major player in Washington politics, said Tim Russert of Meet the Press wanted me to brief him on then Senator Bob Kerry's health care plan. He was running for a presidential nomination back then. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why NBC, with its millions of dollars, needed me to do its research. Sure enough, Tim Russert called me. So how about Kerry's health care plan? He asked. I said, well, it's complicated. I was a minute into explaining how it would affect the quality of care to patients when Russert cut me off. How's it going to play on the Hill, he asked. No clue, I said. I thought you wanted to know if the plan was good or bad. 30 seconds later, our conversation ended. He couldn't get off the phone quick enough. If you want to know why our healthcare system is such a mess, spend a little time in Washington. We live in a society where we have freedom to make choices in what consumer goods we buy, in who we send to the State House or Congress, and what medical services we want. Truth is, we know a lot more about consumer goods or our elected officials than we do about the quality of our health care. Now, that's not headline news, of course, and that's beginning to change. But medical radiation remains a black hole for most consumers, and truth be told, for many physicians. I'm sure you are wondering why, with all the things in the world to investigate, I came knocking on your door. Well, it began with an angry call from a radiologist, upset over sloppy practices at a New York City hospital. Neonates were repeatedly given whole-body x-rays with no protection, sometimes as many as 10 of them. And these practices had continued for a long time. Now that was the key for me, a long time. To me, that meant these problems were systemic within the hospital. No internal or external controls. And if problems like this were surfacing at this hospital, what's to say that they aren't happening at other hospitals around the country? And so began my 2-year reporting project on medical radiation. I was surprised at how little the media had written about medical radiation, and I quickly found out why. There was no central database of accidents, no single government agency providing oversight, and there was an absence of the reporter's best friend, lawsuits. There was also the problem, not a small one, of establishing cause and effect. Speaking of cause and effect, I was stunned at the lack of curiosity by many physicians when patients came in with radiation damage. For example, for months, patients had been losing their hair in what appeared to be razor-cut straight-line bands around their head. Physicians were perplexed and apparently blissfully ignorant. Now, I'm no doctor, of course, but I don't need to be one to ask the obvious question here. What unusual thing has happened to your head recently? Well, that question apparently wasn't asked very often because these overdoses kept happening. As we now don't know, they were caused by CT brain perfusion scans, equipment that had been improperly set. Why it took many, many months for doctors to link the missing hair to that scan is more than mystifying. It's obscene. The FDA, whom I consulted, turned out to be very uncooperative. Eventually, a theme emerged. Blame the lowest person on the totem pole, the radiation technologists. The role of equipment manufacturers in recommending dosage went largely unexplored. When one medical physicist began to speak out about how the machines were improperly set up, he found himself in hot water back home, where his institution received significant funding from a prominent equipment manufacturer. In the world of dentistry, manufacturers in 3D imaging turned out to be very, very influential. The cone beam CT scanner, while providing brilliant 3D images of teeth, roots, and jaws, also produced more radiation than some other methods. As I wrote back then, quote, "The cone beam's popularity has been fueled in part by misinformation about its safety and efficacy, some of it coming from dentists paid or sponsored by manufacturers to give speeches, seminars, and continuing education classes. The Journal of the American Dental Association even allowed one of the leading cone beam manufacturers to underwrite an issue devoted entirely to cone beam technology." One of my great frustrations in researching medical radiation issues were laws ostensibly designed to protect patient privacy, but were really written to protect hospitals and doctors from liability. New York State kept records of medical radiation accidents, but wouldn't release them. They presented their findings to outside conferences, but when I asked for these records, they cited patient confidentiality and state laws. It took me 6 to 9 months of hassling with them to get those records, and even when I got them, the names of institutions were redacted. I was also disappointed that some doctors and their institutions refused to speak up, even when patients and their families wanted them to. Consider the case of Scott Jerome Parks. He was massively over-radiated while being treated for tongue cancer at a New York hospital, not once, but 3 times. It took me months to learn his name, so I could document what went wrong and provide, if you will, a teaching moment. He knew he was going to die, and he suffered horribly. Even though his dying wish was to let the world know what exactly had happened to him, to prevent it from happening again, a doctor who knew his name and had recommended a different treatment refused to help. For 2 weeks, every day, I took a subway to the Upper West Side to visit his office. Not once did he come out to see me. Not once did he return any of my phone calls. Shortly after Mr. Jerome Parks was overdosed, the New York City Health Department became so concerned about the misuse of linear accelerators that they issued an urgent warning. Be extra careful, they said, when using these powerful devices. On the very day that warning was issued, a breast cancer patient at a nearby hospital received the first of 27 days of overdoses. One doctor used pictures of her horrible wounds at a conference, documenting their lengthy effort to treat those wounds. But when I asked to interview him on the record, the doctor refused. Our first story summed up our findings. Quote, patients often know little about the harm that can result when safety rules are violated and ever more powerful and technologically complex machines go awry. While this new technology allows doctors to more accurately attack tumors and reduce certain mistakes, its complexity has created new avenues of error through software flaws, faulty programming, poor safety procedures, or inadequate staffing and training. Now, I know what you're thinking. Openness is a great concept in theory, but we are already under attack from plaintiffs' lawyers. Well, as one famous politician said, I feel your pain. Here's why. When I was a reporter at ABC News, I came into work one day and discovered that I had gone down in history as the recipient of the biggest libel slander suit ever. $10 billion. That's B as in boy. What had I done? I had produced the first stories about nicotine manipulation to ensure addiction. Philip Morris, which, as you know, has given you folks plenty of business over the years, didn't like what we had reported, and they wanted to intimidate me and any other reporter from considering reporting about their activities, really reporting their decades of lies, lies, and more lies. So you want to intimidate someone? $10 billion is a nice round figure. Now, the $10 billion sure as heck frightened ABC News. So when I obtained the most important internal tobacco documents in history, ABC wouldn't let me do the story. In fact, they confiscated my documents. Mysteriously, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions on this, those documents ended up at the New York Times, which put them on the front page. In the end, I didn't pay a penny, but Big Tobacco ended up paying out a couple of $100 billion. So all's well that ends well, almost. After I published my last article on medical radiation, I gave a speech to 1,000 medical physicists. I confess that I had never even heard of a medical physicist before I began this series. Initially, I found myself rather intimidated when talking to them about their professional responsibilities in keeping patients safe. After all, I was so bad at math that when the University of Wisconsin offered a science class, Physics for Poets, I wouldn't take it because I thought it was too hard. But here's what I remember most about medical physicists. Every single time I called one of them, seeking a better understanding of medical radiation, I always got a return call. Not once did they refuse to answer any of my questions. Afterwards, their speaker evaluations were most enlightening, overwhelmingly favorable, in fact very favorable, but not all of them. Let me quote from some of the negative ones. One said, quote, "All he has done is use the public's fear of radiation to scare them, not educate them." Another said, quote, "Not very helpful or sympathetic to the downside of the furor he has caused, especially that potential patients may be harmed by avoiding treatment due to an irrational fear." They actually used the word irrational fear of radiation as a result of his articles. I must say I did worry about that. I was so worried about it, I discussed it with my editors beforehand. I didn't want patients not to get the diagnostic services that they needed or the therapeutic radiation to attack the cancer they had. I didn't want that at all. But the truth is, I hear the same refrain in connection with many of my investigations. When I reported on substandard or counterfeit pharmaceuticals, I was told people will be afraid to take their medicine. When I reported on substandard hospitals, I was told patients won't get the care they need. When I reported on substandard medical laboratories, I was told people won't pay to have these vital tests done. Invariably, I found these fears overblown. I have this belief that it is better to give the public more information, however flawed it may be, than less. I have this belief that it is wrong, very wrong, to keep information private that an intelligent consumer would want to know. I have this belief that patients who come to you asking questions, that is a good thing. And if they are nervous or frightened, you should know how to calm them down with the facts. That is your job. It may be inconvenient, it may be uncomfortable, but that is your job and your responsibility. Because honesty and openness is always the best policy. Thank you for listening to me, and don't think for a minute that I don't appreciate all that you do to give people hope when they need it the most.